guys. Thanks for hanging out with us this morning at i90. It's good to have you. If we have not met, my name's Dave. I'm the lead pastor here. It's great to have you on this sunny, muggy day. Hopefully you're surviving the summer okay. And the summer actually is kind of like, have you had that conversation in your house yet that, wow, kids, school's starting in a few weeks? Isn't that depressing? Gosh, we started having that conversation this past week. But we got a lot of summer left. I think we're going to have some more fun. We got a bunch left to do in this series called More Than Words, and that's what we're going to keep working on today. So what we are doing, if you have not been with us or haven't been playing along at home or whatever, if you're just not familiar with what we're doing, we're in a book called, the book of James, because it was written by a guy named James. The Bible's really tricky in how it names its books. So we're reading a book by James to a bunch of Jewish Christians who have been dispersed throughout the known world at the time, and he's talking to them about what it means to be a follower of Jesus, which you think, oh, well, yeah, duh, that's what a lot of the Bible talks about, right? But James, probably more so than any other New Testament author, he really just kind of wants to hit us in the gut with it. For some reason, he's just passionate. He wants us to know, hey, I'm not holding back. I'm not kind of, pulling any punches here. I want you to understand what it really means to know Jesus, what it really means to follow him. And here's the big idea, and I think this is James' big idea. We just sort of put it in our words for this series today in our series, More Than Words. But it's simply this, that when it comes to being a Christian, what you say does not prove who you are. What you do proves who you are. That's James' big idea. That from start to finish in his letter, he is hoping, he's begging, I think he's praying that you and I as his listeners, and definitely his listeners back then in the first century, would understand that's what this thing all comes down to. Now, it doesn't mean you try to earn God's love by doing enough good things. It doesn't mean you try to tip the scales enough to get in his favor and go to heaven someday. No, you are saved. I am saved by grace alone. We put our trust in what Jesus did for us on the cross. God says, you're in my family. You're good to go. It's all about what he's done, not what we do. But James' point is, if you've accepted that gift of grace into your life, you should be changed. Something should start to pour out of you that looks a little different than maybe what it looked like before. And ultimately, our faith isn't going to be proven by saying, yeah, I'm a Christian. Yeah, I'll stand in that line. Yeah, I'll check that box. Yeah, that's me. Our faith is going to be proven by what we do, not by what we say. So we looked at a lot of different topics and different things that he brings up in this letter. Today, we're shifting gears a little bit. He shifts gears a little bit and starts to tackle a new topic. In fact, we caught a little glimpse of it in that clip because that's really what James gets into. Have you ever known that person or maybe been that person? Or you still are that person, it's okay, we can admit it, but who's like, you got your whole life planned out? When you're 18 or maybe even when you're 12 or something like that, or you hit 22 and you're like, here's what I'm going to do and here's when I'm going to do it. And you're focused on it like a laser beam. You're like, this is what I want. These are my plans. Nothing's going to stop me. And that's how you live your life. James has something to say about that. James says, when we live our lives that way, and it really ultimately comes down to the heart, and we'll talk about that in a minute, it's hard to do that and be a follower of Jesus. It's hard to say, you know what, I can make my plans, I can do whatever I want, and come hell or high water, I'm going to make it happen. I'm going to have that Jeep Grand Cherokee by the time I'm 25. James says, then there's a problem. Then what you actually do may not be lining up with what you say when it comes to your faith. So we're going to look at the verses. I'm just going to read all through them. We're at the end, actually, of James chapter 4. We looked at the beginning of James chapter 4 last week. I'm just going to read through the verses. You can follow along in your notes. You look on the screen as well, and you'll see what he's talking about here. Then we'll kind of circle back and make some comments about it. So verse 13, James chapter 4. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Keep going to the next couple verses, verse 15. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. And then James, and again, we've talked about this in prior weeks, it seems like he goes total rogue on us, goes super random, like my kids when they're talking about, a cartoon, then they talk about monkeys 5 seconds later, and you're like, well, that was random. Where'd that come from? James does that to us sometimes, but that's not what he's doing here. So this last verse, you're going to be like, whoa, Dave, that should be for next week's talk. You broke it off in the wrong spot. How in the world does that relate? It relates. James is very strategic in all that he says. So the very last thing he says here, if anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, it is sin for them. That's his conclusion. That's his summary statement of this next part of his letter. So what is James talking about? This is one of those passages for me, and for whatever reason, I've just always, as I've gotten into pastoral ministry, felt like this is one of the things God wants me to do, is take some of those passages of the Bible that I think we look at them wrong. We goof them up. We kind of say, well, I once heard this, or just it's obvious that it says this or this, and we draw these conclusions, and maybe we don't do it necessarily taking the whole context of the rest of the book in mind, or maybe the rest of the New Testament, or maybe the whole Bible. And we kind of draw some conclusions that maybe aren't correct, maybe aren't really what the Bible's trying to teach us. And I think this is one of those passages. So what we're going to do first, and when I look at a passage like this, I often like to start this way. I'd encourage, if you read the Bible on your own, I encourage everyone to certainly do that. This is a good way for you to start as well when you kind of look at some of this stuff. We're going to talk about what James is not saying in this passage first. In fact, I think there's three things that James actually, and you might be tempted to be like, well, no, wait, obviously that's what he's saying. This is not what James is saying, all right? And I think that's a good place to start. So the first thing that James is not saying in this passage is that your life is insignificant. He is not saying that. Here's the verse. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. James doesn't think we're insignificant. James doesn't think our lives are meaningless in the whole cosmic scheme of things. It's not what he's saying at all. He's building to a bigger point. And he needs us to understand ultimately kind of who we are in the scope of the universe and how little in one sense we are and how big God's is in another sense. He's building up to something. But if you read the rest of the Bible, and I think a lot of you already know this, one of the key themes over and over and over again is that every life is significant. Every life matters. Doesn't matter what background, doesn't matter where you were raised, how much money you have, male, female, nothing matters. Every life in God's eyes is absolutely significant. One of the most famous verses that people have ever read, ever spoke about, John 3:16, for God so loved the world that he gave his only son. The world means everyone. Very intentional use of word there. Every single person on this planet, God looks at and says, valuable, worthwhile. Worthwhile enough for me to literally sacrifice my son for him, her, that boy, that girl. Jesus once told a parable about a shepherd leaving 99 of his obedient, follow the rule sheep to go follow the one knucklehead that kept going off track. And what did Jesus say? That one is just as valuable as the other 99. I'm going to go find him. The psalmist in Psalm 139 says, you created my inmost being, you knit me together in my mother's womb. In other words, every little detail about you I care about. Your life is so significant. And that goes for every single human being on the face of this planet. James is not saying your life is insignificant. He's building towards a much bigger point. Here's another thing he's not saying. He's not saying you shouldn't plan, save, or invest for the future. He's not saying that. Here's the verse, though, verse 13. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. And you know because of what he says after that, he's making that to sound like a negative thing. Like he's kind of setting us up for, but that's the wrong way to approach life. But again, it's building towards a bigger point. James is not saying you shouldn't save, you shouldn't eliminate debt, you shouldn't plan for the future, you shouldn't have visions and dreams and things that you work towards. In this specific context, he was addressing Christian business people. He was specifically looking at Christians, Jewish people who become Christians, and saying, hey, some of you are merchants, some of you make money, and this is kind of how you approach life. Well, I'm just going to go do this and make my plans and do all this kind of stuff. Well, again, he's building towards a bigger point here, but he is not saying, because the Bible in many places says the opposite of this, to not save, to not plan, to not invest. Absolutely not. Just read the book of Proverbs. You'll find so many little nuggets in there about saving, planning for the future, having vision, getting out of debt, doing smart financial things to set yourself up for success in the future. The Bible's not against those things. That's not what James is saying. So please know that. But here's one more thing I think that he's not saying in this passage. He's not saying you shouldn't pray big, audacious prayers. This is the verse sometimes that I think people struggle with when it comes to this. Verse 15, instead you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. Some of us will look at that and we'll say, we'll cut out the rest of the section and we'll just say, well, if it is the Lord's will, and we apply that to everything. And we're afraid to ask God for anything specific. And we just say, well, God, if it's your will, would you maybe do something whatever that may be, because I don't want to offend you and say, no. Over and over and over again in the Bible, you read about people praying these big, audacious, big, bold, God, do the impossible. God, work a miracle here. God, we need you to show up and do something amazing. James is not saying, don't do that. Again, he's building towards a significant point about the overall context, the overall direction of our lives. Joshua in the Old Testament, if you know the story, was in battle against the Amalekites, and he's leading the battle, and he was confident that God was with him. He was confident that God was giving victory, but he saw that the sun was going down. Are you familiar with this story? Incredible story. You should read it in the book of Joshua. And the sun's going down, and what does he pray? God, make the sun stand still. You've never prayed that, have you? God, make the sun stand still in the sky. God does it. Makes the sun stand still in the sky. So he's got enough daylight to finish off his enemy, finish that conquest so Israel can get that city and keep carrying out the plan God had for them. That's a big, audacious plan. Joshua was in the middle of battle, and he's like, oh my gosh, the sun's going down. Hey, God, if it's your will, could you maybe please do something to help me? But I don't want to offend you, so I'm not going to say it too boldly. But only if it's your will, only if it's your will. I only want your will. No! God, do something big. We need you. We need your help. And he showed up. The apostles, over and over again in the New Testament, pray for healing for people. Only stuff God could do. Miraculous. Everyone around them thought they were totally freaks. Like, what are you doing? God, heal this person. They have leprosy. They can't walk. We need your help. Driving out the demon, all that kind of stuff. Big, bold, audacious prayers. If James was saying, no, don't do that, he'd be in contradiction of like the rest of the Bible. It's not something he is saying in this passage. So what is he saying? What's his point? I think he's trying to remind us, and definitely his listeners some 2,000 years ago as well, of who always is in charge. Who, in terms of the ultimate big picture, really could and should be the one calling the shots. You and I, by nature, want to live life thinking we are in charge. It's just human nature. We go through, man, I've got my dreams. Maybe you're not as anal as the person in the video, but man, I lay it all out, and this is what I want to do and how I want to do it. Yeah, I may even go to church and give lip service to God and check the box, but come on, day to day, I'm calling the shots. I decide how this thing's going to play out. And I've got my passions, I've got my dreams, I've got my visions, I've got my plans. And God darn it, I'm going to fulfill them. And James says, when we approach life that way, we're not playing for God's team. We're not playing with him as the one in charge. And James wants us to know, if you want to really follow Jesus, you want to be serious about this, where your actions prove your faith, not what you say, you've got to take this issue seriously. And I think there's a few things here that James is saying in this passage. In fact, I think they're just things that he's confirming from the rest of the Bible that we already know to be true, or he wants us to know to be true. And the first one is this: followers of Jesus truly believe that God is ultimately the one in control of their lives. James says, if you're going to really follow Christ, following his foot, you're serious about this. It's not just lip service. It's not just checking the box. It's not just, I show up to church, but that's great because that's what my parents want me to do, or that's great because I was raised in the South and that's what everyone in the South does, or that's great. No, you want it to be meaningful. You want it to be the defining aspect of your life, which is what Jesus calls us to do. You and I have to believe that God is ultimately the one who is in control of our lives. Having kids is probably one of the greatest examples of this that I have gone through and seen in other people in my adult life. When Rachel and I set out, got married, we had a plan for kids. How many of you who are parents, we got a plan, right? We're going to wait 5 years. Then we'll have child number 1. We'll wait 2 more years. We'll have child number 2. And we'll have them in June because that's a good month for having babies, right? And then, the next, if we have 3, if that's part of the plan, it'll be a Christmas baby because wouldn't it be great to have a baby around Christmas? So we'll make sure it happens around then. We've got our plans. I don't know why we do that with kids, but we do it. How many of your plans worked out exactly right? There's the occasional oddball you run into that's just like, and they wear a suit every day. Come on, Jimmy. It just doesn't happen. But we have our plans. Rachel and I learned a real good lesson when it came to that. God's plans are a lot better. God is really in control. We could have made all the plans in the world, and guess what? When it comes to something like having kids, you figure out pretty quick, right? If you want to take this God thing seriously, you're not in charge, are you? You don't get to make that call. I don't know if this was just my generation, but it feels like my generation really did this when it came up to planning out our lives. I did it. All my buddies did it. High school, college, right? We just, again, by 18, I'll be doing this. By 25, I'll have the Jeep Grand Cherokee. By 35, I'll retire. How many people in my generation said they're going to retire in their mid-30s? Idiots. My gosh. Again, I was one of them. Oh, yeah, then I'll be on a boat in the Caribbean the rest of my... Whatever. But we do. We make our plans. We say, no. And again, we could do it as Christians. Yeah, I go to church. Yeah, I check the box, all that kind of stuff. But no, here's what I want for my life. Whether or not that has anything to do with God and what he may want for me. But here's my plans. Followers of Jesus, James wants us to know, truly believe that God is ultimately the one in control of their lives. And guys, this all comes back to just one word. It keeps popping up in the book of James. I mean, if we really want to live out what James challenges to live out, there's one word that's got to be part of our vocabulary. Maybe not part of our vocabulary, because maybe that would prove it's not true, but part of our lives, and that's humility. When it's at the end of the day, recognizing, you know what, this life isn't about me. My salvation isn't even about me. My relationship with God isn't even about me. It's all about him. And ultimately, he is the one in control. Doesn't mean I can't have plans, doesn't mean I can't have dreams, doesn't mean I can't save and invest and do all those sorts of things. The Bible doesn't say all those things are bad. In fact, a lot of those things probably came from God if they're good things. Things with relationships and ministry and family and all that. God probably gave you those desires. I guess maybe if it's sin, like, I'm going to steal the moon like Gru, and I want to be evil. Well, that's probably didn't come from God. But a lot of other things that are in your heart that you want to do, they may have come from God. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you say, I know who's in charge here. My plans might be kind of his. They may not be. Ultimately, at the end of the day, it's about God. It's not about me. It starts with a state of heart, with humility. The second thing I think James is saying in this passage is that followers of Jesus desire God's will to be done in their lives more than their own. That a follower of Jesus literally gets up in the morning and says, you know what, God, I got a lot of plans today. I got a lot of things I got to accomplish today. I got a lot of things to do today, right? And I'm going to go do them, right? I got to feed the family. I got to keep moving forward, and that's okay. The Bible didn't say anything bad about any of that stuff. The Bible didn't say it's bad to make money. Don't ever let someone tell you that. In fact, you can find a lot of things where the Bible says, yeah, man, be prosperous. Make money. Do good with it. All those things are great, though. But ultimately, at the end of the day, a follower of Jesus says, God, I want your will, though, more than mine. So if I'm off, give me a course correction. God, if I'm off, slap me around a little bit. Get me back. Your will, ultimately, not mine. Jesus taught his followers to pray this. Some of you know this in Matthew chapter 6. He says, this then is how you should pray when he's teaching his disciples. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In other words, your posture before God, whether it's prayer, it's Jesus is talking about a state of the heart here. When you come before God, when you look at God and therefore how you look at the rest of your life in the world, it should be one of, you know what, I got things to do, I got plans, I got dreams, I got visions, great, but God, align my will with yours. In fact, that's one of the best prayers you could pray every day. If your heart isn't, and again, the words don't matter. I mean, God's not care less. He's looking at your heart anyway, right? So don't worry if I just say it right, just like Jesus said to pray. That's just a translation that some dude hundreds of years ago, that's how he wrote it down. We took it from the Greek and whatever. It's your heart. God, I can live my life totally according to my plans, my stuff, my desires, but you know what? Sometimes that ends up in a bad situation. I want your will. Or even maybe I can fulfill all my dreams, all my desires, all this stuff, but ultimately, if it's not your will, what difference did it make? And the joy and the peace and the fulfillment that I'm really searching for in life is not going to be there if I'm not in your will. So God, would you align my will with yours? Again, it doesn't mean you get up in the morning and until you have a dove drop a piece of paper out of the sky with, God says today to do this, go shopping, then brush your teeth. That's probably not going to happen, I'm guessing. Maybe it will, and that'd be cool, and tell me about it if it does, but I'm guessing that's not how it's going to work. So yeah, you still get up and you do stuff, but here's what I've come to know, experience in my life, when I sincerely mean that, and again, God will know, If you're just doing it lip service, oh, cool, a formula, I'll try to do that, and, God will show me what to do. No, if you really want to know God's will for your life, and you sincerely communicate that to him, I mean, that's the cry of your heart, guess what'll happen? You'll be in his will. Sometimes you don't realize it until you're looking back and say, wow, look what God did. I didn't even see that coming, but man, I stayed humble before him. I asked him, God, please, your will, not mine. And it's amazing. You look back at your life and say, look what God did. I didn't even understand it at the time, but look how he shifted us this way, and look how he did this, and on and on and on. His will is so much better. But followers of Jesus, they ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't mean they don't plan or don't invest. Doesn't mean they don't carry out dreams and visions and all that kind of stuff, but at the end of the day, they desire God's will to be done in their lives more than their own. James wants us to know that. And I think there's one more thing, though, and honestly, this is probably the toughest one to really live out. But I believe it's something James wants us to wrestle with this morning, and it's this. Followers of Jesus find meaning and purpose in life regardless, and that's the key word there, regardless of unfulfilled desires or expectations. See, the big problem when you live life, and you really, practically speaking, live it out like you're in charge. Again, even if you say you're a Christian, yeah, great, God, awesome, great. I'll do the Bible study, I'll check the box, I'll go to church, give the $10 or whatever. Fine, I did my Christian bit. You could even say you're a Christian, but when we live life this way, where ultimately I'm in charge, I'm calling shots, it's my plans, it's my desires, I don't care less what God's will is for me, I'm moving forward with what I want. When those expectations, those dreams, those plans don't come to fruition, sometimes they do, but usually they don't, at least not perfectly, what do? Are you in a counseling office just like crying, saying, man, I followed him to Nebraska and it didn't work out. My life's over now. I don't have my Jeep Grand Cherokee yet. What do? James is saying that's going to happen. You're going to have dreams and things and all kinds of things you're going to go after, and sometimes they're just not going to happen. Hopefully it's because you're trusting in God and he's kind of shifting you into something else, and that's better anyway. But you can't be in the ditch. A follower of Jesus doesn't place their peace and their joy and their fulfillment in those things. They place it in the fact that no matter what happens, God loves me, God died for me, I can trust him no matter what. And if I seek him in my life, I can have peace, I can have joy. Someday when my life here is over on this earth, I'm just spend eternity with him in heaven, whatever that looks like, but that should be amazing. So cool, I'm good. Because I trust in what he has done and who he is, not whether or not my plans worked out. That's the tough part in this. That's where the rubber, for those of us, if we want our faith to be proven by our actions, that's where the rubber meets the road with what James is saying. Heck, the fact that I don't play in the NFL and I've yet to win a Mr. Universe competition, and I'm a pretty happy guy, shows that this is possible. I had a lot of plans that didn't come to fruition, right? Still do, every day. Crud, that didn't work out. Guess I was wrong there. And if I base my joy on that, my peace on that, my contentment on that in life, I'd be living in the ditch. James is saying a follower of Jesus will find meaning and purpose in life regardless of whether or not their plans, their dreams, their visions come to fruition. Because that's not what it's all about anyway. Now again, every day I got to wake up and say, God, align my will with yours. God, I want your will, not mine. Yeah, I got to go get some stuff done today, God, and I'm going to do it, right? Because we got to do stuff here at this church. My family needs me. I'm going to keep going. But God, where I'm not in line, please, please change my course. And this is what's so cool. If that is the desire of your heart, if that is what you're putting before him every day, you can rest assured, if you are in his will, you are always in the best place you could possibly be. Again, half the time you won't even understand that you're in his will. But if you are humble and that's what your desire is, God is going to take you there. And trust me, trust James, ultimately trust Jesus. That's always the best place to be. And then James, God darn it, he throws this last verse on here. And again, it just seems so random and so, okay, great, I'm tracking with that. It's not necessarily easy, but I get it. Cool. And then we get to verse 17. I'm going to read it to you one more time. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and doesn't do it, It is sin for them. Okay, what are you talking about, James? For crying out loud. This was hard enough as it was. This was gut-wrenching enough as it was. As convicting was enough as it was. But then you throw in this verse that feels like it should be in the next part or a new topic or something. But that guy on the stage said it's connected to it. What is the deal? I'm not going to tell you with 100% certainty that I know the answer. And I've read a lot of commentators on this. I've read a lot of scholars. I've tried to, research what the real brainy people say about this. Most people will say the same thing. I can't tell you with 100% certainty what this says because it is kind of crazy, but clearly how he wrote the letter, it was intended to go with what we just talked about. But here's what I think. Here's what I believe from my own experience. You and I tend to look at sin, right, the bad stuff, the disobedience to God stuff, as when we break the rules, as when we do the wrong thing. And you can live the kind of life that James is describing, right? I've got my plans of tomorrow I'm going to do this, and next year I'm going to do that, and on and on and on. And great, yeah, I'm a Christian, I go to church, but that's where my vision is, and that's what I'm going to do, and nothing can stop me, and on and my will be done, right? You can do that and kind of stay away from the bad stuff in the process. Yeah, I'm a good Christian. I didn't kill anyone. I didn't commit adultery. I didn't, lie on my entrance exams. I didn't whatever, right? I'm a good Christian guy or good Christian woman, but I got my plans, and man, I'm going for it, and all my stuff, and I go to church on Sundays, but I'm so focused, I do all my James is saying you can do that and not do, again, the bad sins over here and still be in sin. Because sin isn't just not doing the bad stuff, it's not doing the good stuff as well. And here's what I think James is getting at. Here's why I think James put this as the concluding verse, concluding statement to what he's talking about in this chapter. Is that when you and I live our life that way, every day all these things float by us. All these opportunities to show grace, all these opportunities to help people in need, all these opportunities to give an encouraging word, all these opportunities to shine the light of Jesus, and we ignore them. Actually, we don't ignore them, we just don't see them. Because it's my thing, it's my plans, it's my stuff, get out of my way, And James says, you know what, I'm sorry, that's sin. Because sin isn't just not doing the bad stuff, it's also not doing the good stuff as well. And that's what happens when we live life that way. That's what happens when ultimately we think we're in charge and not God. And James is saying, and I've said it a million times here, I believe with all my heart, if you're a follower of Jesus, and I get it, some of you aren't, and that's great. This is a church for you to come and ask those questions and explore. We love that. But if you're a follower of Jesus, James wants you to know you are still on this planet for a reason. You are still on this planet not just to follow rules, not just to go to church, but to do good. To let God use you to change people's lives, to be a blessing, to shine his light. And when we live life that way, it's just hard to do. James in Matthew 23, he's discussing some things with some of the religious leaders at the time, and he kind of hits on this point when he says, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give a tenth of your spices," that was tithing, right? Like we would give money or something. He says, you give a tenth of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, but you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former. In other words, it's good to follow the rules, and one of the rules for us as good Jewish people is we give a tenth of everything that we have to the temple. Great. You should do that. But you're neglecting all these good things that you could do. These sins of omission, as like the real scholarly types would call them. And you're missing it. You think you're so right with God, but you have your own agenda and your own plans, and you're so focused on that you ignore all the good that God has called you to do. James doesn't want us to be like that. James wants us to experience why we're here on this earth. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that comes with desiring God's will more than our own. Understanding that he's ultimately in control, not us. And then getting up every day and saying, all right, God, guide me. You take control of this ship. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I'm going to trust that your will was worked out.